Good afternoon, and welcome to a joint seminar of the Conference Group on Italian Politics and Society of the American Political Science Association, the Società Italiana di Scienza Politica, and the Robert Schuman Center at the European University Institute. Now, this is a series of events that we've been hosting over the past 3 to 4 years, trying to bring together the community of scholars interested in studying Italy, but also looking at the Italian case in comparative perspective. I'm extremely grateful for the support of the Società Italiana di Scienza Politica and the Conference Group on Italian Politics and Society for maintaining this conversation about Italy. Please note that this conversation will be recorded and posted on the EUI website of the Robert Schuman Center after this event. And that way we can ensure that there's more attention given to this very important conversation. Now, I'm going to hand over the conversation to our host, moderator, and discussant, Elisabetta Di Giorgi. Elisabetta was sent to us by the Società Italiana di Scienza Politica. Elisabetta, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this conversation and also for agreeing to moderate on such short notice. So over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Well, thank you first for inviting me. Thank you for having me here. Today I will discuss a very interesting paper that Andrea Pedrazzani and Francesco Zucchini of the University of Milano will present. So I won't take much time, but I would only like to introduce to you the paper they will present, which is entitled "The Constitutional Reforms and the Competing Risks of Government Fall: Italy in Comparative Perspective." So I leave the floor to Andrea and Francesco, who have about 15 minutes to present, and then we will pass to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody. Above all, thank you to Eric and Elisabetta and the Congress for having invited us to present this paper. This paper is about the proposal of reform coming from the government of Italy, from Meloni and the center-right coalition, but above all from Meloni. And we tried, in fact, to see the effect, or the prospective effect of this reform compared to compared to the current system and compared to another possible reform introducing the positive confidence, the constructive no confidence vote. So this is somehow the outline of our presentation. Let me just start from the beginning. Let me just summarize very briefly the main feature of this reform. This reform, called the premierato, introduced the direct election of the prime minister and the power of the prime minister to dissolve the parliament, the power of the prime minister to appoint and dismiss individual ministers. This is something new in the Italian political system, not new at all in other countries, obviously. And if the government loses the parliamentary no confidence vote, according to this reform, the parliament is automatically dissolved. And the prime minister has the power to dissolve the parliament. So, I mean, somehow both institutions have the power to dissolve each other somehow, reciprocally. It is also implied in this reform an unspecified electoral bonus for the list linked to the winning prime minister candidate. The goals of the reforms officially are strengthening the prime minister and enhancing the government stability, and also aligning the governing majority more closely to to the voters with the voters' preferences. And we try to evaluate mostly in this somehow exercise precisely the effects on the government stability. As we will see, however, the government stability can be separated in two possible ways how the government can collapse. So for this reason, the title is about the competing risk. Obviously in Italy there was a big debate and many hearings in the parliament, mostly, to be honest, monopolized by experts in constitutional law. I mean, the political scientists were very few. I mean, they were not really involved in this debate. It is an official debate in the parliament. I mean, it was most of the hearings were monopolized by constitutional law experts. Precisely because of it, we try to assess somehow the empirical effect of this reform by looking at the data, as we will see. So somehow this paper can be considered an example of evidence-based institutional policy. Let me say that I summarized somehow, I mean, the main features of this reform. Let me just emphasize that the fact that the prime minister is elected directly is really an unicum, something that doesn't exist anywhere else among the parliament, among the democracies, with the limited, with just the only example in Israel for less than 10 years, but with different features. So the research question behind our attempt is what is the potential impact of Meloni-Casellati reform, and what is the potential impact of other hypothetical reforms, as for instance, the constructive no-confidence vote procedures. There is a really, I mean, the literature about cabinet stability and duration is a factory. So we have a huge, I mean, there are so many contributions and many very different theories. In this slide, you can see just an example of the main contribution coming from, and also the most recent maybe contribution. But I mean, we can just summarize this contribution by focusing on three sets of factors that usually are considered as the main explanatory variables of the cabinet termination. So rules and institutional actors, so theories based upon these type of things, political preferences and party fragmentation, and cabinet structural features. And all of these factors affect differently the two types of competing risk that I was talking about just a few minutes ago. So, as I told you, the government can collapse just because of early elections, or can collapse just because of inter-electoral replacement, so during the same legislature. And these are two different types of risks. And so the variables that affect one type of risk not necessarily affect the other. Also, which are the main explanation based upon the rules and the institutional actors? Well, the role played by the prime minister, the role played by the head of state, the existence of the constructive vote on no confidence. So all of these institutional factors can affect, in fact, according to the theories, according to the literature, the probability to observe the government collapse. Usually, when we have the prime minister power, the prime minister power to dissolve the parliament, you observe more likely early elections. When we have on the contrary, when the power to dissolve the parliament is in the hands of the head of state, the risk of intellectual replacement increases. And we will see later why, but these are, I mean, something that is somehow accepted in literature as possible relationship between some institutional features and the probability of government collapse. In the system with the constructive vote of no confidence, both type of risk, in fact, decreases usually. What about other sets of variables? Is another set of variables that is considered as possible explanatory variables of probability of government collapse is the ideological heterogeneity, both at the level of the government and the level of the parliament. There is a debate about which of the two arenas is the most relevant in order to predict the government instability and the party fragmentation. And also the strong bicameralism is considered a feature that can affect I mean, the probability to observe a government collapse because of the possible differences in terms of the ideological preferences between the two chambers when the two chambers are very important, both for the government survival and for the policy change. Finally, we have features associated with the cabinet structural features. So usually this type of explanation is somehow based mostly on the office-seeking type of government coalition theories. So coalition theory is based upon the idea that the offices are the main goal of the parties. Usually, obviously, in this case, the oversized governments are considered the most fragile, and also the minority governments. If you think in terms of spoils, I mean, this is pretty intuitive. Okay, so now let me just show you, I mean, so these are the main explanatory variables. Now let me just show you the three, institutional, constitutional arrangement that we considered in the empirical part of the paper. Let me just describe this constitutional arrangement according somehow a game theoretical representation, a very simple and not very sophisticated game theoretical representation. So let me show you, for instance, how it works in a very stylized way, the termination game in the case of Italy now, according to the current Italian constitution, so without any change. So as you can see, I mean, it's a very simplified way because I didn't differentiate between the motion of no confidence and the confidence vote. So, I mean, formally there is a distinction, but the effect is similar, obviously. If you do not have the confidence after having attached the confidence on a bill, we have more or less the same outcome that if the parliament vote in favor of a motion of no confidence. So in any case, so or the prime minister or a government party can decide to interrupt somehow the life of the government through a no confidence vote, and the majority can pass or reject. And then, and this is the crucial aspect is of the current political system, and the head of the state can decide what it is necessary to do. If dissolve the parliament or instead not dissolve the parliament and looking for another formatter and that can create a new government. And so if you analyze in depth the preferences, the usual preferences of the president of the republic or the head of the state, that I wanted to remember is not directly voted by the voters, but is indirectly voted by the parliament. He or she doesn't have any interest, in fact, in dissolve the parliament unless it's really obliged by the political circumstances. So the most likely outcome in this case is a new government instead of early election. So if you try to solve this somehow game through backward induction, the most likely result is a new government. And this can somehow explain why we have so many government cabinets during the same legislatures according to the current rules in Italy. So the first hypothesis coming from this type of representation is the following one. Ceteris paribus, the current Italian rules imply that the highest risk of inter-electoral government replacement and a low risk of early election. What about the reform proposed by Meloni and Casellati, so the so-called premierato? Obviously, in this case, I mean, the head of the state doesn't play any role at all. Why? Because if the prime minister decides to resign, then there is early election. If a government party or another party through a no confidence motion achieve a majority in the parliament in order to dismiss the current government, there are still new elections. There is only one exception for one time. So there is the possibility for the majority supporting the government to substitute just once the current prime minister if the prime minister resign without dissolve the parliament. But this is something not very likely, according to our evaluation, because if a prime minister decides to resign without dissolving the parliament, maybe cannot have any chance to have a political career anymore after this resignation. So the temptation to dissolve the parliament in case of crisis, we think that is very, very strong. So even in this case, we suppose that the probability to have a very high probability to have a early election is high. So so this is what by describing this reform according to a game. This is the inference that we have according to our analysis. So the hypothesis too is that the reform proposed by the Italian government implies a very low risk of intellectual government replacement, but the highest risk of early election. Let me say also that the introduction of the power for the prime minister to dismiss the ministers is very important, because some crises that now cannot solve unless we have a new government with this power can be solved simply by a reshuffle. So this is something that you have to take in consideration. So what about
to say that before the third hypothesis that the time is almost over overall. So just to give you an idea of the balance between the parts.
I mean, the three hypotheses you need to see.
No, in general, the time is almost over for the presentation. So if you have all the data and the results to present, it is just to give you an idea of the general time you have. We mean 2 minutes.
Okay. I will just. So what about the last game? Okay, according to the last game, so the constructing our confidence vote, we suppose that both a new government during the same legislature, the early election are less likely, because for the structure of the game, because in this case, if someone try to change the government and need to have another majority supporting a new chancellor, And in this case, we don't have early election. And so, I mean, in this case, the risk of early election is relatively low. And in case the current government does not have a majority, but there is no alternative majority in favor of a new chancellor, then the crucial actor becomes the head of the state, but only in this case. And so now I don't have the time, but I mean the combination of these two features, according to our interpretation, reduce both risks: the risk of early election and the risk of new government. Okay, so at the end of the story, these are the three hypotheses that you can see in the slide. And by using a specific and very large data set, we try to check to control these hypotheses. And now, I mean, the floor is for Andrea.
Thank you, Francesco. I will be brief. Okay.
Okay, I have to. Yes, I have to.
Okay.
I have to. Okay, now I interrupted the. You can take the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, thank you. So I will try to go very briefly. Which is the analysis that we perform. We perform two steps in our analysis. We use comparative data taken from 27 European democracies from the end of the Second World War. Well, in the first step, our analysis is, first of all, in the first step, a standard multivariate duration model. So we analyze the risk of government termination, and we analyze two types of risks. The risk of cabinet termination because of early elections, and the risk of cabinet termination because the government is replaced during the same legislature. So in the first step, we perform this standard comparative analysis, in which we include all the independent variables that we can draw from the literature. And importantly, we include independent variables that capture the role of institutional actors and the rules about government termination and assembly dissolution. And so the first step is not really interesting per se, but it's a basis that we need to perform the second step, on which I focus now. The second step is this one. So after running a duration model, an analysis of cabinet termination, we estimate, after this first estimation, we estimate the probabilities of government, the probability that governments with characteristics typical of Italian governments have to terminate. And we do this in 4 institutional scenarios based on different rules about cabinet and parliament dissolution. So we take into account 4 scenarios. Actually, they are 3 plus 1. Okay. First scenario, the current institutional scenario in Italy, where the dissolution of the parliament is almost entirely in the hands of the president. Second scenario, German model, so constructive no confidence vote, and dissolution powers are shared among different actors. Scenario number 3, the premierato reform, PM dissolution, because in this scenario, the power to dissolve parliament is in the hands of the prime minister and also in the hand of the parliament. And then we try to also model the fact that in the premierato reform, the premier will be or would be directly elected, so he or she will have a lot of power, really an unconstrained power to dissolve parliament. But however, let's focus on the first three scenarios to make things simple. And we estimated the probability functions, let's say the probability, the survival curves, the probability of government termination for governments in these four scenarios, and we take into account the characteristics typical of Italian cabinets in terms of party heterogeneity and ideological party fragmentation and ideological heterogeneity. So let's focus on this graph, which is the main which includes the main findings. Here we have survival probabilities of government, survival functions. So we have time on the horizontal axis, and we have survival probabilities of cabinets on the vertical axis. So as time goes by, as time passes, governments are more likely to fall. Okay? So here we compare the current situation in Italy, so the blue function, the blue line, with the other two functions, the green line, which is the premierato reform, and the red line, the red function, which is the German model. So if a function, if a curve is higher than another, it means that governments are less stable under this scenario. If a curve is lower than another one, it means that governments are more unstable. They are more likely to fall. So let's start from the central graph. In the central graph, we compared the status quo, the blue line, with the premierato reform, the green line. As you can see, the central graph is about the risk that governments fall for an interelectoral replacement. As you can see, the premierato reform would reduce the probability of government termination because of interelectoral replacement. And the same would be done also by constructive no confidence vote, so the red line. However, the premierato reform would be more effective in this. Then, what about the risk of early elections? So, graph on the right. In this case, we compare again the blue line, the current situation, the status quo, with the premierato, the green line. The premierato reform would make Italian cabinets more likely to fall for early elections, while the constructive no confidence vote, German model, would make Italian cabinets less likely to fall for early elections. And then, so our hypotheses that I don't want to repeat, they are confirmed. And then on the left side, we have the general risk of government termination. So which is the overall impact of premierato and constructive no confidence vote. So both premierato and the German model would increase government stability. Maybe the German model would make Italian government a bit more stable than premierato. And this is true also if we change the values for party fragmentation and ideological heterogeneity. So to conclude, both premierato and both the premierato reform and a possible reform introducing the constructive no confidence vote would increase the stability of Italian cabinets. However, the constructive no confidence vote would make Italian cabinet stronger against both risks, would reduce the no confidence vote like in Germany, would reduce the risk of falling for the elections and falling for an interelectoral replacement. The premierato would reduce the risk of falling for an interelectoral replacement, but would increase the risk of falling for early election. So choosing ideally, choosing between premierato and the German model reflects a preference for a particular risk of government termination. If premierato is approved, we will have in Italy more frequently early elections, and this could be good for someone and bad for other ones. I leave this for the discussion, but let me come back to the goals stated by the Prime Minister Meloni, so the main promoter of premierato. Meloni says, well, one of the goals of the premierato is making Italian cabinets more stable. So to give Italian cabinets a full legislative horizon, to give Italian cabinets a full legislative term in order to make reforms, policy reforms, and so on. However, we can say that if the legislative term becomes shorter because it is the government that decides to shorten the legislative term and go to early elections, then it's disputable that the goal is achieved. And maybe also we can say, but this is a speculation and we leave this for the discussion, maybe, choosing between premierato and constructive no confidence vote or similar reforms also reveals a preference for different types of democracy, because we think that under the premierato, well, if we introduce the constructive no confidence vote, we stay in a parliamentary system democracy, in a parliamentary type of democracy. With the premierato, to another kind of democracy, because in a parliamentary democracy, I mean, the government is the agent of the parliament. Under premierato, the parliament or the parliamentary majority would become the agent of a directly elected prime minister. But that's all. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you. Thank you both. Now I will give the floor to myself as discussant. I will try to be brief. First of all, let me thank the authors, Francesco and Andrea, for giving me and us, I would say, the opportunity to reflect on this reform and its potential impact on the lifespan of Italian government through their original analysis based on such a large data set and an extremely long time span. And not only that, also for giving us the opportunity to test the potential impact of another possible reform, alternative to this one, that is the one of the constructive vote of no confidence, which could achieve, as we saw, the same objectives, that is to guarantee greater stability to Italian government without the institutional, maybe upheavals that the premierato would entail. Two types of government termination were analyzed, that due to a government replacement during the same legislature, so without going back to the polls, and that due to early elections. We saw that applying the current settings of the Italian political system, a government termination due to a government replacement is frequent, while the second type, that due to early election, is rare or even very rare. Then, thanks to the survival analysis, we saw that the reform proposed by the Italian right-wing government would bring to a very low risk of inter-electoral government replacement, but a higher risk, higher than that with the current settings, if I'm not wrong, of early elections. While the constructive vote of no confidence would not produce this latter outcome. I would like to say that, first of all, I really enjoyed reading this paper, as I believe it contributes to reach one of the goals that should be proper to political science and comparative politics, that is studying other institutional settings and comparing them and their application, and trying to understand through comparison whether they would fit our system, whether they would really bring improvements to that, And if not, which other model could do so, if any? So I'm not going to get into a discussion about the role of our discipline, of course, especially in Italy, and what we could do more and better to contribute to policy making in a more substantive way. But I am proposing two lines of discussion that are, however, related to this. First, studying in general the functioning of representative institutions in Italy, and in particular, looking at the results of this study, one wonders what the real objective of this reform is. The political objective, the political goal. Are the current right-wing government and Meloni in particular really interested in increasing the stability of Italian governments, or is the objective rather to strengthen the figure of the leader, as Andrea mentioned in one of the last slides? To concentrate power in the hands of one person, that is the Prime Minister, giving them the opportunity to control their majority through the threat of parliamentary dissolution. This comes to mind since much milder reforms, as we saw, from the point of view of altering, if not overturning, the balance of power could lead, as we have seen, to the same, if not better results in terms of longevity of government. As also other scholars have mentioned before me, one should also wonder whether stability in office automatically produces effective decision-making, or whether precisely in order to remain in office with this reform, the head of government will need to avoid important decisions which might cause frictions within the majority, then risking immobility instead of improving decision-making and implementing the program, as Meloni said in the quote that we have seen in one of the last slides. In short, direct election is by no means a guarantee of efficiency and effective decision-making. Much depends on the abilities of the elected leader and the quality of the parliamentary coalition majority supporting them. All of these leads me to say that if I were to find one shortcoming in the paper, which I found overall very, very good, both in the theoretical framework and in the analysis, this would be the political element. Political factors make all the difference. And they could do that also in the case of premierato. So, for example, let us look at Meloni's stability today without the need of any reform or direct election. It is a stability that is due to her leadership qualities, her relationship with her own party, and the new balance of power within the right-wing majority. These are all political elements. I would suggest, therefore, to add, perhaps, before the analysis of the results, a section on Italian government in the various phases since 1948, precisely to show how, after all, at certain times, the goal of stability of government and prime ministers seemed closer, but without the need for reforms of any kind, but also only, thanks to political variables. Speaking of leadership, and this is my last point, it should be remembered also that the very high number of Italian governments, 68 since 1946, does not coincide with the number of prime ministers, which is 31 in total. Therefore, a reflection might be added on this point as well. Not sure if we can even add a variable related to this in the analysis, but it might be something to consider. So the strength of the political figures, of the leaders, which is, again, a political element, of course. I think this is all. This is all I had to say so far. So thank you again for this very interesting work. And I would open the floor either to reply from the authors or directly to new questions or comments, and then maybe we can collect them all together and respond at the end, as the authors prefer.
Okay. We can collect the different answers and maybe we can try to answer at the end of this
Okay.
collection.
So
If
if there
are other questions, obviously.
of course.
Otherwise,
Any question or comment, of course, on the presentation and the paper, if you have had the chance to read it. Eric.
No, thanks, guys. This I think this is an amazing piece of analytic work. I guess the question that I have is, in the operationalization of the variables, you show these movements in the lines, and that represents the relative likelihood in the survival model. But I guess, how robust are these intervals, right? I mean, you know, if I were to look at the estimations, are we really seeing large statistical differences in these intervals as the survival models progress? Or is it, in fact, if you look at the way that the estimates are specified, are the lines actually potentially at least closer together than they appear to be?
Thank you. Other questions from the floor? I think that we can move to the answers and then see whether there are any other.
I can try to comment, to answer your observations, and Andrea maybe can answer about the robustness of the empirical analysis. Let me say that obviously maybe we don't believe so much on the official justifications for this type of reform, but as analysts we have to take seriously in consideration this type of explanation offered by political agents. Now, I mean, I think that is the most correct way to behave in this case. So they use the two arguments. One is precisely the government stability, and the other is less, much more difficult to measure, is somehow the type of fine-tuning between the will of the people and the type of leadership and the elected officials. So we try to check, I mean, if the effect in terms of government stability. But obviously, I agree with you that probably there are also other, maybe more important objectives behind. But obviously, we try to take seriously what they say. Yes, I mean, the political leadership, the strength of the political leadership is important in order to explain the government stability. But this is, I mean, if this is associated with the institutional variables, it's something that we can try to study scientifically when it's based upon, I mean, not very predictable and idiosyncratic features. I mean, it's very difficult to I mean, to study according to this type of approach. I mean, obviously, it's similar to ask ourselves, what about the Fifth Republic in France? It would have been the same without de Gaulle, or who knows? I mean, it's difficult to answer. But let me say that one really critical aspect that this reform is precisely the fact that the power of dismiss the parliament is in the hands of the premier. So this is really the premier directly elected by the people. This is the big difference between, I mean, this reform and, for instance, the British system. Because in the British system, still the party play a role. in this reform, the party in itself, it doesn't play so big role. So the party as organization, even the party of the leader, is really the first victim of this reform. And this is something crucial. And for this reason, in one of the simulations somehow that we made, we assume a party equals 0. In terms of, I mean, when you calculate the level of fragmentation, different, I mean, we put party equals 0, and in fact, the outcome in terms of probability of early election, obviously, it's even more astonishing, because the probability of election increases a lot in this case, because you don't have any restraint, even any party restraint. Okay, so. And now, Andrea, if you want to answer to the problem of robustness.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, we also calculated at a certain point in our analysis these differences between survival curves. Then we don't report them because, I mean, it's 3 models with 4 survival curves. So not all of them, sorry, are different from one another, but however they are always different from statistically different from the status quo, and also there is a difference, statistical difference between the German model, constructive no confidence vote, and the premierato concerning interelectoral replacement. But they are not different from a statistical point if we look at the overall risk. So that's why we said, well, if we look at the overall risk, the premierato and the constructive no confidence vote, they almost would have the same impact. What is important, we think, is that they have a statistical they have an impact that is statistically different from the current status quo in that case.
Yeah, I mean, let me say that, I mean, there is not really a big difference between the confidence vote procedures and the reform proposed by Meloni in terms of overall risk. So now the issue is that why, I mean, is the decision between the 2 types of risk. What do we consider mostly dangerous, more dangerous? The risk of government collapse during the same legislature, or the risk of early election? And there are some really, we think that there are some very specific and bad risk in the reform of Meloni, because as the premier is directly legitimized by the people, imagine that you decide to, I mean, the majority of the party would like to dismiss this leader for some reason, because it's not efficient at all, because it become mad. I mean, for any reason, it's much more difficult in this system compared to any other. So, I mean, the fact that and the leader in this case can try to have an early election instead of resign. So, I mean, this is the crucial aspect, I think, that the preference for one risk instead of another. And behind this preference, probably, there is also a different concept of democracy.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Andrea. Is there any other question or comment to the... Oh, Michelangelo.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I like it. I like this work very much. I saw the preliminary version, and I think that it's important, this work, to provide some empirical evidence to some clues we have and ideas about the reform and the effect of reform, and or the effect of the non-constructive vote of confidence. I had a question about the way you defined a new cabinet or the end of the cabinet, because in the paper, as far as I understand, you have as criteria, you have change of PM, you have the classic change of party composition, new elections, but you have also formal resignation, if I'm not wrong, and so new investiture. And I was wondering whether, I think since the reform is meant to avoid the change of the majority of the party composition, just to leave the last criteria out. So just to have change of PM, change of party composition, or new election. So because I was thinking of some cases in Italy, like if I'm not wrong, again, I think Moro and also Craxi, they had two cabinets, but the cabinets were the same PM, same party composition. So in these cases, I think that the new cabinet is not really a new cabinet, but it's a sort of conflict resolution internally managed this way. So especially when you are not afraid of alternation, you can manage this way. You decide to create a new cabinet formally, but it's the same cabinet. It's just management of internal conflict. So you want to refresh your coalition. So I wanted to ask you, it's just curiosity. I don't think it changes too much, but if you had talked to focus only on these three criteria and not the fourth, so formal resignation, which is sometimes too formal, too constitutional, and not substantial. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands, so I think that you can reply.
Andrea,
Yes. No. I mean, we use thank you, Michelangelo. We use the ERDA dataset. Actually, even though maybe there is some mistake, some typo in the presentation, but or maybe also in the paper, we have to check. But in the ERDA dataset, the more cabinets that you mentioned are counted just as one cabinet. So so we have to check the slides again, and also maybe the paper. Thank you so much, because there is an inconsistency.
The criterion usually by ERDA is the fact that in the Council of Ministers there is a change in terms of party composition. So, for instance, if you have a new party but that has only a role as the undersecretary of the junior minister, in this case is still the same government, because there is no change in the Council of Ministers. So the criterion used in the data set is this one. Okay, so and probably I don't remember now the case of Craxi and Moro perfectly. I think in any case of Moro, no change at all. So the same government.
The same government.
In the paper you wrote was considered to terminate when the PM or the cabinet formally resigned, when general elections were held, or when the change took place in the party composition, or the covered identity. So formally resigned, I thought.
You're right. This is a mistake. Thank you, because this is because this is not true, because we
it makes sense. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Here. Just one last chance to make a question, or we can close by, of course, leaving the floor again to Eric Jones, who is our host today, of course. Eric?
So, thank you so much, Elisabetta. You've done a wonderful job moderating at last moment. And thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Andrea. This is a fantastic paper. For those of you who have attended, the video recording of this meeting will be hosted on the EUI website and YouTube channel. All I want to say is thank you to the Società Italiana di Scienza Politica for helping us in this venture, and also to the conference group on Italian politics and society. We'll be holding other events like this in the future. These events are hugely important for helping us understand what's going on in Italian politics, and for bridging the study of Italian politics with the study of comparative politics more generally. So thank you all for participating, and have a terrific evening.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you a lot. Bye bye.